Welcome to Ancestral Kitchen Podcast, where we celebrate ancestral food wisdom in a modern kitchen. And Andrew, do you want to have a look at the first question? And
Yeah. So this one comes up pretty much every time somebody starts baking with home milled flour. Why aren't my breads rising as much
yeah,
once they move from like a white flour to a home milled flour?
handmade, yeah. And there are two
Yeah.
reasons for that. And there's the scientific one, which is generally when you first milled your flour, that the gluten in your flour is not as strong as flour that's been left to sit. So there's a process called maturing, which bakers can use for freshening the flour, where they basically just leave it and it oxidizes. So basically, the grain is open, you've milled it, and oxygen can access it. That will make the flour stronger. The scientific reason for that is because oxygen exposure promotes the formation of disulfide bridges between gluten proteins, creating a more cohesive and elastic network, apparently.
Wow.
So if you grind your flour fresh, you're not going to have those disulfide bridges. Commercially, oxidizing agents are added to achieve aging in a few hours. So if you go and look at
Wow. They actually
they add things to it.
want
Because
it to oxidize.
They can't wait for it to oxidize naturally. They want it to oxidize quickly. So they add, you might see if you look at a loaf in a store, ascorbic acid, chlorine dioxide, or azodicarbonamide. Say that quickly 7 times.
That is just completely boggles my mind because everything we do in life is kind of avoiding oxidizing.
Yeah, exactly. And this is saying
And that's insane that
oxidized.
it's actually intentionally doing it. Wow. Okay.
Exactly.
All right.
Only because they want the bread to rise more. It's a matter of, again, what do you expect from your bread? What do you want from your bread? And well, obviously we want it to rise more, don't we? Because that's the bread that we see in the pictures. So that's what they do. But it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do from our perspective, I don't think. If you want to take advantage of that, though, and try it, you can mix your bread for longer. That's what everyone who has kind of addressed this says. Spend more time mixing your bread to allow the formation of the gluten network more fully. So that's one reason why your bread's not rise as much. In my experience, the main reason why your breads may not rise as much is because probably you're overproofing them. So there's a huge difference between working with shop bought flour, which has been in a bag for you're not quite sure how long, and you're bringing it into your kitchen to make bread, and making bread with flour that you've literally just ground from a grain. And it's so easy that home milled flour will be more active, have more microbes on it, and be super ready to ferment, and will ferment much more quickly than a shop bought flour. You'll find later on that there's a comment from one of our listeners in Canada who calls shop bought flour dead flour. And that's why you might call it dead flour, because when you freshly mill your grain, you realise how active flour is that's freshly milled. And so it's so easy to overproof it, particularly if you've been making bread with shop-bought flour for a long time. You get used to it. You get used to how long it takes.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you find it takes half the time to proof. I had this when I bought my Mockmill 100, and I swapped from milling with milled flour from a mill to my own flour. I had to pay attention to my breads and actually watch them, not go into automatic mode, because I was too easily overproofing them. And then I'd end up with a loaf, with a flying crust, or with dents, or with big holes in it by mistake. So I would say the main reason why your breads don't rise as much is that you're overproofing. So experiment with cutting back that proofing time, watch your actual dough, look for the size change, and put it in the oven earlier.
I can see your attention in this, Allison, in that in Discord when people post pictures of bread, you're like a bread doctor and that you can diagnose. I think what you did was, and they always say, "Oh, you're right." So and I know this is because you've done it all. So you've seen what
It is
happens.
hard to tell when you're not in someone's kitchen and you haven't seen what they've done, but
Mm,
still saying that, it is easy to perhaps read between lines and see, hang on, what's going
right.
on here? And I know, like you said, because I've done that myself many times in my own kitchen. So
Yeah.
we had a
Yeah.
similar question, which is, why do all my breads ferment more quickly? Why do all my breads
Mhm.
pancake? And that's the same thing, over fermentation. The bread will pancake because it's fermented far more than the gluten network in it can handle. And so it goes plugh and kind of pancakes. So
Tells you your flour's really good, though. So
it tells your flours
there's
are
that.
lovely, for sure. So
Mm.
again, if your breads are pancaking, it's because they're fermented more quickly, because the grain is alive and much more active. If you'd like to listen to the rest of this conversation, you'll find a link popping up right about now, or it's in the show notes. Do hit subscribe and head over to our podcast tab, where you'll find hundreds of episodes that you can listen to whilst you're washing up, driving, or just working in the kitchen.